Hello and welcome. You're watching Big Picture with me, Vishal Dahiya, and today we're going to talk about the issue of role of industry in Aatmanirbhar Bharat campaign. In fact, Prime Minister, while addressing CII's annual summit on Wednesday, did point out very clearly the important role industry has to play in the Aatmanirbhar Bharat campaign. And he also went on to describe as to what the government has done so far in the past few years in ensuring that industry does get a lot of push from the government side in terms of the policy decisions, in terms of interventions, be it the tax issues or be it ease of doing business. And there are several aspects of this particular issue which we will look at it in detail. Let's first introduce our guest to you. Let me begin with Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya, who is joining us, Editorial Director of Business Standard. Welcome, sir. We also have with us Mr. Parag Sharma, Vice Chairman of the CII's National Committee on Aatmanirbhar Bharat. Welcome, both of you, Mr. Parag Sharma as well. And let me begin with you, Mr. Bhattacharya. Let's first start by understanding the key highlights of what the Prime Minister said. Looks like what he was pointing out to was that the climate is investor-friendly, business-friendly as far as India is concerned, and there is a lot more scope to do as far as industry is concerned.
Yes, Mr. Dahiya, I think you summed it up well. He sounded very, very positive, very confident, and he very hopeful of the way the Indian industry should be responding to some of the initiatives that the government has taken. Briefly, there are 5 or 6 key points that I noticed in his short speech. Number one, he focused a lot on how the new India is going to ride on new opportunities. So he was trying to paint a scenario in which the new India led by Indian industry will have to grab the new opportunities. In other words, there are new policy initiatives, new emerging situations and opportunities that new India has to grab in the shape of Indian industry and trade. That's number one. Number two, he redefined the idea of made in India. And in my view, he tried to make sure that the stress is on making in India, not necessarily made by India. In a sense that any foreign company which comes in India and produces something in India is also part of made in India. So his redefinition of the idea of Make in India is very significant. In other words, he is actually welcoming FDI and foreign portfolio investment in a big way, because in his idea of Make in India is actually encouraging foreign investment as well. And this Aatmanirbhar Bharat concept is, in a sense, has been defined as not as opposed to FDI, but welcoming of FDI. Point number 3 is, I think he's focused a lot on ease of doing business. He's talked about undoing the wrongs of the past, and he has cited the retrospective tax amendment bill, which has been corrected now, that the mistake of 2012 has been corrected. That is point number 3. Point number 4, he highlighted the startup space, and he talked about how 60 unicorns have been born in India, and 1/3 of which were actually created and came to light during the pandemic years.
Okay.
And finally, he held out the hope that agricultural reforms, which remain suspended so far, probably will see light of day once again, because in an industry body meeting, he talked about the need of agricultural reforms and how Indian agriculture will have to be connected to the global markets with the help of reforms that the government has initiated. So I think on the whole, it was a message to Indian industry that opportunities are there to be grabbed, and the government will be behind the Indian industry in helping them grab those opportunities.
Okay, indeed, the opportunities are there for the industry. That's a fair sum up from your side, Mr. Bhattacharya, for the Prime Minister said. We'll come to the agriculture sector as well. But let me first bring in the industry response here as well. Mr. Parag Sharma is with us. Mr. Parag, from your point of view, if we have to understand not only what the Prime Minister said, but also the very underlying principle of Aatmanirbhar Bharat, as Mr. Bhattacharya was pointing out, is making in India.
Yeah, Mr. Dahiya, I think the clear message from the Prime Minister was that whatever government has to do to implement Aatmanirbhar Bharat has almost been done, and now it is for the industry to do its bit. Just to give an example, let's say in our sector, solar sector where I work, there was a long pending issue that we were importing most of the solar modules from China. And the Indian industry was demanding for right impetus so that we can start doing it in India. What has been done is that from 1st April 2022, a 40% BCD has been levied on the solar modules. This is big enough gap which can incentivize domestic manufacturing. Secondly, they also have done it in a smart way. I think hardly in the past it has been done that almost a year before this announcement has been made, so that there is sufficient time given to all the stakeholders so that they can mold into this new regime of 40% BCD. And on top of all of it, there is sufficient demand being created within India. Almost 10 to 15 gigawatt of solar bits are coming up every year. So what government is trying to say is that, look, we have done everything. We have given you 40% advantage in terms of cost of modules by levying this BCD. We have given sufficient time for change. We have also created a huge demand. Now it is for the industry to now start setting up these modules and cell lines and do their bit. So I think that's largely the messaging which was coming out from the Prime Minister's message.
Okay, fair enough. But Mr. Parag, one very important aspect of Prime Minister's address, and that's also a very important aspect of the present situation, is that the new industries, that is new startups rather, if we call them, in all sectors, across all sectors, have done a tremendous work, and they seem to be the hallmark of the growth when we are talking about specifically during the pandemic days as well, when the times were tough. These were the companies or corporations, startups, which actually came up with solutions and also scaled up their operations, and some of them ended up becoming unicorns.
That is so true. The IT and the ITES segment has not been really impacted by the COVID. And they are really the job creators and the unicorns which are really coming up now.
Mr. Bhattacharya, your views there, if we have to understand, the way there has been a growth spurt in the startup industry, in every sector.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more there. There has been, the pandemic years has actually seen the boost to the startup ecosystem. There are, as the Prime Minister himself mentioned, as many as 60 unicorns is the number that India can be proud of, and out of which 21 came about during the pandemic in the year, which means in the last 1.5 years. So I think there is certainly entrepreneurship is seeing a new phase, and you are seeing a lot of initiatives which is on the entrepreneurship side. And remember that the Startup India campaign was actually given a push by this government sometime around 2015-16, and it seems that it does take time, but the startup revolution, so to say, is very much for anybody to see. Having said that, let me also say that the Prime Minister has talked about a new idea on growth and industrial investment in the country, in a sense that slightly departing from the earlier policies of make India a competitive place through tariff reduction. The Prime Minister is talking about an industry which should be encouraged through a tariff-based approach, in a sense that if a foreign company has to compete in India, it better comes in India and produces the goods and services in India, because if it has to do compete with the Indian products by exporting their stuff from there to India, it has to meet up with the curbs or competition from tariffs. As Mr. Sharma also pointed out, how there is a basic custom duty has already been announced that will be enforced from time to come, which means essentially it's a tariff-based approach where it is not by enhancing the competitive spirit of Indian industry within the country, but instead giving tariff protection to the domestic industry to use that tariffs as a protective shield and grow and acquire new market shares. Now, this is probably will work in some sectors, but in many other sectors, where international competition is very, very tough and very, very stiff, probably this may have to undergo some sort of modification. But given certain sectors, given the kind of production-linked incentive schemes, the kind of the tariffs that has been announced and the tariffs that have been revised upwards in many cases, I think what you are seeing is encouraging industry to invest more in the hope of a market that will be insulated against competition through imports. It may work up to a point, but at some point there would be a consumer demand for having better choices and open competition. So one has to hope and see how this policy of encouraging domestic industry through a tariff-based approach leads to a point where the customer choices will also be addressed and taken care of.
Okay. Mr. Sharma, would you agree with what Mr. Bhattacharya is pointing out there, that the present day policies are actually giving an edge to the domestic industry in the competitive market out there?
Yeah, let me also say one thing on top of what Mr. Bhattacharya said. Obviously, one thing is that what Government of India has done for startups or for infrastructure sector or industry in large. But the other thing is we have to see it in the background of global environment. Right now, the LIBOR is as low as 0.15, 0.16%. It's all-time low interest rates, whether globally or even in India also. It's the government GSEC rate is hardly between 5 to 5.5%. So this is an excellent time for fundraise in general in the global environment. It has little to do with what Government of India has done. This is more an opportunity in this time to raise capital. And the ease of availability of capital is so good at this time. And that's why we are seeing so many new investments coming up in India, whether it is global pension funds, whether it is private equity players, whether it is lenders, the ECB lenders. So they all are infused with funds and funds at a very attractive returns, which is making sense to most of the people who are looking for funds. People waited for years and they were not getting the right pricing and they were not getting exits. But this is a time when they are really getting exits. So we also have to club with whatever government has done with respect to what the international market are at.
Okay. Mr. Bhattacharya, let me go back to one of the points which you mentioned in your first response, and that is something which the Prime Minister also said, that is regarding the agriculture sector. When we're looking at agriculture sector, it's not just about farmers, it's about the agri-industry as well.
Absolutely. I think, the fact that he will choose an industry annual meeting where, the big industry leaders in the manufacturing sector, the services sector, agriculture representatives were not there, but he chose that forum to talk about how Indian agriculture needs to be made more competitive and connect with the markets and the global markets. In other words, he wants to see a greater synergy between the Indian corporate sector, the Indian industry, Indian markets with Indian agriculture. And remember that the three agricultural laws that were passed by Indian Parliament in the summer of 2020, and which unfortunately had to be sort of mothballed because of the Supreme Court's intervention. Now actually talked about how Indian farming can actually enjoy the advantages of accessing greater markets, allowing Indian companies to enter Indian agriculture and connect a farm producer to the market and get better recovery and get better returns from the markets. So I think that the connect between Indian agriculture and the Indian corporate sector is often not recognized and is generally been seen as an exploitative relationship. But I think Prime Minister chose this forum to remind the industry leaders that Indian agriculture is there, and the government has done its bit and will do its bit in terms of reforming Indian agriculture to those laws. And therefore, the opportunity will exist, and the kind of new opportunities that he's talking about most probably will also include the new opportunity that will exist in Indian agriculture, which will become more open, more competitive, with more investments. Because Indian agriculture, if it needs one of the few things very, very urgently, is more investment and more technology. And if Indian industry gets attracted to Indian agriculture in a sense that they can invest more resources in Indian agriculture, they can deploy the latest technologies in farming and farm procedures and irrigation facilities and the storage facilities and the freedom to market produce, of course, with checks and balances that does not exploit the Indian farmers, then I think a new opportunities will exist, not only for Indian industry, but for the farming, but also from the Indian economy as such. So I think the Prime Minister's reference to Indian agriculture is very significant at this point in time. So I am actually looking forward to some sort of a resolution that the government may have thought of, just as the government has found a resolution to its long pending
retrospective tax issue.
So similarly, agricultural law stalemate may also see some sort of resolution in the coming days. One can be reasonably hopeful.
Okay. Mr. Parag Sharma, Prime Minister also spoke about how it's time for the industry to go ahead and take on new responsibilities, tackle new challenges, and work in sync with the government policies as well. Now, the question I'm asking you is, how do you think that's achievable in the future? And also, what more is the industry looking forward to from the government side when we're talking about both these stakeholders working hand in hand with each other?
Right. So I think one thing which is very clear, as Mr. Bhattacharya also mentioned, this whole tariff barriers that has been built to promote domestic manufacturing can't last for very long. First of all, let's say when they say that 40% duty has been levied on modules, it's leading to almost 20-30 paise higher tariff, which at the end of the day, you and me as a power consumer is paying for it. And secondly, Indian manufacturers just can't cater to the domestic manufacturing. They have to look at exports. And when they look at exports, they have to be globally competitive. So slowly, so this is more of an impetus given, a short time thing which can sustain when the duties are there so that they are at least protected from Chinese supplies or some other countries' supplies and they have an advantage of pricing. But over a long term, they have to really up the ante and be competitive globally. That's one part.
Okay.
The second part, as you rightly said, that industry needs a lot. Industry, other than building this tariff barrier, which is more for manufacturers, they need regulatory certainty. That is which is missing in most of the sectors. These changes which happens almost every quarter, some regulatory changes, it really bothers a lot about for any international investors. What we need is more of a clear time horizon that what all policy changes in different sectors are planned over the years, and there should not be any surprises. So that's one. Other than the regulatory certainty, the second leg where industry is struggling is the difference between what the central government is saying and what is happening at the state level. So there's hardly any consensus. There's a lot of problems which industry is facing because sometimes almost varied policies across states between central and state.
Okay.
So these are the three important elements which one has to really consider.
Okay. Mr. Bhattacharya, your views there, sir, on what lies ahead and tackling the future challenges with both the industry and the government working together.
I think there is no two, there cannot be two opinions about that. Industry and the government coming closer to each other. But I think the prime ministers and the government's signals on Make in India, on FDI, and the manner in which he talked about the resolution of the retrospective tax amendment problem, and plus the manner in which he hinted at agricultural reforms going in the coming days. I think these are signals, and what we need to be watchful about is to what extent this tariff-based approach is limited in a sense that they do not harm the long-term competitiveness of Indian industry, particularly in its efforts to promote exports in the global markets. And also the customer's choice element, because the customer cannot be made to bear the burden of higher tariffs. Because for many, many years in the past, in the 1970s and the 1980s, the high tariff barriers did not do much good to Indian industry to become competitive. From 1991 onwards, tariffs came down. But right now, there are some tendencies to raise tariffs to give domestic industry some protection against a certain specific set of circumstances. But one has to hope and see that these are only short-term aberrations or deviations, and one has to go back to setting the basic house in order by improving the infrastructure, making sure that as Mr. Sharma was pointing out, making sure that the capital is made available to industry at a reasonable international competitive rate. The factor market reforms take place in terms of land and labor. The labor codes which are ready, which has been notified and gazetted, but the rules are yet to be framed. So all those, the various factor market reforms that have been done, and they must be notified and rules must be framed, so that Indian industry can actually realize its true potential.
Okay, indeed, those are the really, really important aspects out there, as both of you are pointing out. Thank you so much, Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya and Mr. Parag Sharma, for sharing your views and insights with us on this important aspect of how government and industry can go ahead and work together to realize the dream of Aatmanirbhar Bharat, or a self-reliant India, as our experts were pointing out, and as the Prime Minister also highlighted in his address at the CII Annual Summit. A lot of policy changes have been done from the government. Industry has also worked really hard, but some challenges remain, and those challenges will have to be tackled in the future by both these stakeholders working hand in hand with each other. We'll come back again. Till then, keep watching. Thank you.